Hey everyone, so in today's session we're focusing on the hotly debated topic of academic freedom and freedom of speech in higher education. In today's podcast, we welcome guest Robiu Salisu, an experienced higher education practitioner working with GoodCourse partner Advance HE. Together, we'll delve into the complexities of freedom of speech and academic freedom and examine why it's such an important topic in universities today. Robbie, thanks so much for joining us. Can you please provide a quick intro to yourself and the institution for our listeners, please?
Good afternoon, Chris, and thank you for having me. My role is a consultant at Advance HE. Advance HE is an organization, is a member-led charity, and we work to improve higher education for staff, students, and the society, really. We operate in the UK, but work with partners all over the globe. For my role as a consultant at Advance HE, my area of practice is mainly delivering training, insights on belonging, inclusive leadership, student staff engagement and partnership, freedom of speech, which we're going to be talking about later today, and community cohesion. I've been working in the higher education sector for over a decade, so got lots of experience in all these different areas.
Awesome, thank you. A great range of experience and definitely relevant to today's conversation. So I guess before we dive into the legislative side of things, could you share a bit of context with us with regards to the challenges students face when arriving at university for the first time and why their experiences in the first half of the first year in particular are so important from a student experience perspective?
That's a really interesting question because there are many challenges students will face arriving in university for the first time. And, the biggest challenge I can think of is the transition or change. You could say that happens in the first 6 months for the majority of students, but for some, it can take a bit longer. And the challenge of change is something that affects all students alike. It can relate to something personal, that change of being in a new environment, and higher education institution campuses are a world within a world. Sometimes people can describe them as a bubble in itself. So, many students will experience that feeling of homesickness. And although this might not apply for, students who are estranged from home or commuting, but for majority of students, they will experience some level of homesickness or challenge. And it can be very daunting. There's that challenge of adjusting to a new academic environment. University academic work can be very demanding and rigorous than what students might be used to in their previous high school or college. So some first year students end up struggling with that, because they're expected to do some self-directed learning, more independent study, and adapt to different teaching style. There's a lot students have to deal with, and this can be compounded by the fact that, they might not have made many friends. They might not have established a support network at the university. So you could say that that first half of the year is really crucial for students to really set that tone for the rest of their university experience, because if they aren't able to establish new routines, form friendship, and start to adapt to that academic demand, they will really find it a struggle. And students will encounter people in the world that make them feel at home, that sense of belonging, but they can also encounter people who make them feel uncomfortable and challenge their sense of thinking and that viewpoint. So it's really something to be mindful of, really, that, that transition can be a big, change for students.
100%. I think what you touched on there with regards to different people and situations challenging a student's kind of mindset, way of thinking, their viewpoints, that actually leads so nicely to the main focus area for today's conversation with regards to freedom of speech and academic freedom. But before we dive into the topics there in particular, I guess I'd love to hear a bit more about, for our listeners who aren't familiar with the topic, just what can you explain with regards to why these topics are important right now in the sector?
Academic freedom and freedom of speech are two closely related concepts. And in the context of higher education today, there are terms that, some people use as interchangeable, but actually they mean different things, as we explain on the GoodCourse. Actually, just for those listeners who are unaware, academic freedom refers to the right of researchers, lecturers, and those working in higher education to engage in research, teaching and learning without fear of censorship or reprisal. So this can be researching challenging or unpopular ideas that may challenge the norms of our beliefs. They're able to do this without fear of losing their jobs or penalized, as long as it's for academic purposes. And that, in a nutshell, is academic freedom. Freedom of speech, on the other hand, though, is a broader concept, and it refers to the right of individuals to express their opinions, their beliefs, and ideas without fear of government or other forms of interference or censorship. So both academic freedom and freedom of speech are really important to that pursuit of knowledge and the advancement of society. We have to understand that, these are things that we have to balance against other important considerations, such as the protection against discrimination and harassment. And so universities and other higher education institutions need to engage in policies and guidelines that help to promote and protect these values. These are all needed for us to maintain that safe and inclusive environment for all members of the higher education community. Yeah, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about kind of that protecting and enshrining this. When we talk about the freedom of speech bill, but that's an example of where there's conversation around what does it mean to protect and enshrine this as part of the higher education sector.
You mentioned there, of course, the impending proposed higher education freedom of speech bill. I guess I'd love to hear a brief introduction to what the bill's proposing, and then we can move on to why it's caused so much debate in the sector so far.
The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill is a proposed piece of legislation in the UK Parliament that the Conservative government introduced in 2021 under Boris Johnson. It followed concerns and reports in sections of the media that some universities were suppressing free speech and stifling debate on certain topics. The bill, which will seek to establish a new legal framework, will place requirements on universities only in England, because a lot of people think it's a UK-wide thing, but actually it's only for institutions in England because education is devolved in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But essentially it's going to ask institutions in England to actively promote and protect free speech, which will require universities to take steps to prevent and rejection of certain speakers. Otherwise, the kind of term that's known as no platforming. So universities will be expected to prevent that rejection of people who might be denied a platform. It will force students' union to also comply with this as well. So this is something that's, again, a very new thing in the sector.
A really good point. I think that's an interesting area to touch on first, Robbie. I know that there's a few different kind of arguments swirling in the mix with regards to pros and cons, but what sort of things have you been discussing, be it within Advanced HE or with any institutions you're working with on this topic currently, that kind of have been relevant discussion points with regards to the pros and cons of the bill itself and the likely implications?
Yeah, now you're putting me on the spot, Chris. Well, I should say that, these perspectives that I'm going to share with you on the pros and cons, they're not necessarily a formulated perspective of advanced HE. They're my, reaction from the conversations I've had with members and what I've noticed in terms of the debate that's currently ongoing. All the indications at the moment look like the bill will pass and gain royal assent before the end of this parliamentary year. And it means that institutions, universities across England will have to adhere to it. Objectively, I think, the protection of free speech is a good thing, as it gives strength to academic freedom and counters some of the archaic process that we do see in higher education, especially with things like the prevent duty, which we talk about in the course. The next positive thing I can probably see from this bill is that it may spark a new innovation for community cohesion. So something that I believe that many universities do really well, bringing communities together, but maybe they don't shout enough about it, So this will be a new way of, sharing those good practice around community cohesion. And we can see new ways of debating, discussions that is facilitated to allow intellectual diversity, which could bring about a more open and inclusive academic environment. On the flip side, however, Chris, I think there are challenges to this bill. Some of it I've alluded to already before. I think universities will need to consider these. Is the conflict within existing policies and institutional plans. So a bad implementation of this bill could lead to a confusion with institutions who have policies or priorities in promoting equity and social justice, for example, because it can lead to that potential for legal challenges, either against the bill itself or a challenge to institutions when people feel like, their rights have been violated, their human rights has been violated. So, it's something to, I guess, watch out for. We can see the pros and cons, but until it's all finalized and put through, then that's when I think we'll start to see, okay, what are the practical implications going forward.
Last thing I guess, Robbie, is you touched a few times already in this podcast on the micro course that you are a key part of developing between GoodCourse and Advanced HE. I guess given you work close with our content team on that as well, the course itself is designed to help educate students on the topics of academic freedom and free speech and how the two intertwine together. Could you please talk us through a bit around kind of the process for developing that micro course and how you think this approach can help higher education institutions better engage students?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a pleasure to work on the course and I helped to design it with GoodCourse itself. So the micro course, the process of doing that was, with the content team at GoodCourse, I felt like we had a lot of synergy actually to kick off and put it all together. We had some differences naturally, but those were resolved through proactive work of the team. I felt like, all of the ideas we were sharing was taken on board and, the feedback was very much received very well. You could see that the team brought their passion into making the course and putting it to the final product, which we're all very pleased with. And I'm sure institutions will find it very useful for their students. I think the approach of GoodCourse as well, just, talking about that kind of student interface, I think is very effective from my experience. I've worked in student engagement for nearly a decade now. I think this course like this, that prioritize engagement and relevant content, are very useful because students relate to, things that are meaningful to them. So therefore, having actors who are students or have relatable personality as students makes it really engaging. And the way the course itself is, styled around TikTok, style videos and interactive quizzes and gamification elements, it really does mean that students are kept engaged, which, means they're more likely to probably learn and take a few things away and retain information than sitting through like a 1 hour online click-through training, tick the box. It is a different style and it's something to be welcome. And really, I'm very pleased with the final product.
Thank you, and appreciate obviously all you and the team's input on that. As you rightly say, today's students are very much used to a TikTok style, short form, engaging formats. Even the most intricate or challenging topics have to be in some way designed into a format that today's students can actually engage with and relate to. So I totally agree, and thanks for being part of that too. Cool, so that's all for this episode of the podcast, but thanks all for listening so far. And if you'd like to learn more about the GoodCourse Advanced HE Academic Freedom and Free Speech micro course for students, then please do get in touch on our site and we can chat further.